and the Prime Minister suspended the plan to do what you're doing now. So break some news with us today. Have you gotten anywhere? What do you see? How do you see that going?
Well, I'd love to. First of all, it's great to be with you, the hometown station. I'd love to be able to tell you that we've achieved this breakthrough. That's what we're trying to achieve. It's a major reform, and we would like to see a change and reform in the judiciary, and actually a broad swath of the Israeli public, both those who voted for the coalition and those in the opposition, believe in the need to reform. There's a question of what the reform should be, how broad it should be, how deep it should be. But the president of Israel has hosted these rounds of discussions, and it's really the first time that the opposition and the coalition have sat together in the same room, and we've tried to work through these issues. So that's what we've been trying to do for the last few weeks, and I hope that we'll achieve a result. The Prime Minister definitely wants to see a compromise.
So the optics of what we see in South Florida, the news headlines Saturday, 100,000 people, very peaceful, very unified, and very adamant that they're concerned with democracy. So explain that, because there is, to your point, great support in another segment of society for these reforms.
Right.
Why are reforms necessary, A, and B, whatever the reforms are, how do you make the opposition comfortable that this isn't about losing a democracy?
Well, I don't think it's about losing a democracy. I think that's sometimes what is said. But I think if you actually get into the details of the reform, even if the reform passed as is, and I don't think it's going to pass as is because it's already been softened, and I think there's a clear desire to reach some sort of compromise, I don't think it would end Israel's democracy. Alan Dershowitz knows a little bit about constitutional reforms and judiciaries, and he's an opponent of the reform. He said if all the reform went through as is, Israel would be more like Canada and New Zealand. Now, Canada's a democracy, New Zealand's a democracy, Israel's a democracy, and will remain a democracy. What has happened in Israel is around 3 decades ago, the court system in Israel became much more active, much more involved in nullifying laws of our parliament, our Congress, which is the Knesset. And the judicial branch of government became bigger and bigger and bigger. And there's a feeling, a very strong feeling among the people who voted for this government. That's not 100,000, that's about 2.5 million people. That something had to be done to rein in the judiciary, keep obviously an independent judiciary, but to have balance and restore balance between the executive, legislative, and judicial branch. And that feeling is very powerful. You're going to see on Thursday there's going to be a protest of people for the reform, and you may get several 100,000. They're talking about the million-person protest. I don't know if 1 million people will come. It will be 200,000, 300,000, 400,000. But it's clear that there are very strong views on both sides of this debate. The ones who are for the reform, they think if we don't have reform, we're going to lose Israel's democracy because you're disempowering the elected branch of government, which is the Knesset. And there are others on the other side and say, well, if you make this or that change to the judiciary, that will endanger Israel's democracy. So there's very strong feelings on both sides. I think when it comes to constitutional reforms, the most important thing is to try to reach a broader consensus, and that's what we're doing now, and I hope we'll succeed.
So you mentioned that there has been some softening. What does that mean in practical terms?
Well, just so you understand, because viewers may not realize this, in Israel, it doesn't work like it does in the United States, where elected officials choose judges. In the American system of government, all federal judges are appointed by the President of the United States, and they are confirmed by the Senate. 2 elected branches of government. In Israel, that's not how you appoint judges. The way you appoint judges is you have a committee. On this committee are actual sitting judges. So imagine, just to understand it in American terms, imagine that in the United States you would choose judges by having 3 sitting Supreme Court judges on a committee that chooses judges. Now, most Americans would think that's not democratic, and they'd be right. It's not democratic. And here in Israel, the major argument is about how we should choose judges. And there is a belief in Israel, which I do not share, by many people who oppose the reforms, that think if political leaders, if elected leaders choose judges, that somehow threatens Israel's democracy. I think the opposite. I think if you don't have elected officials that choose judges, and if judges are effectively choosing themselves, that endangers democracy. So there are clear very strong views on both sides. And what's important right now, without getting into the details, because our system is different than the U.S. system, we don't have a written constitution in here, we don't have a bicameral legislature, we don't have a federal system. There are many differences. I think the most important thing is to understand and appreciate how vibrant Israel's democracy is, that we want to preserve it, we want to strengthen it, and that's what we're trying to do.
We're watching that happen as we speak.
Absolutely.
So, the headline, it's complicated. All right, so some of your biggest supporters, Israel's biggest supporters, are right here, right now, to help celebrate the 75th. And we're going to talk all about that and all those connections when we come right back.